More of those moments than we can count, certainly more than we can play, but great hearing Paul's voice this morning as we honor his memory. Paul's family having a memorial service private for the family today, but there's going to be a public celebration of his life in the coming days, and we will give you more details about that. Gallo Radio Show, SuperTalk, Mississippi. Thanks for being with us this morning. I will tell you, the ceasefire text line is hopping. My apologies for not being able to get to more of your messages. I do want to share this one, though, because I think it's one that a lot of you can relate to. Tim in Tupelo says, for years I would listen to Paul on the way to work each morning, usually pulling up to work with the last 5 to 10 minutes of his show on and sitting in the car and waiting for him to sign off with his famous ciao. Then I would go to work. We will miss Paul, but he would want us to get back to work for Mississippi. So this one is for you, Paul. Ciao. See you on the other side. Rest in peace. That from Tim in Tupelo. Thank you to all of you for your messages this morning. It has been an honor to visit with people that were regular guests on with Paul. And when you serve multiple terms as a lieutenant governor and governor, there were a lot of conversations. Former Governor Phil Bryant joins us this morning. Governor Bryant, appreciate a few minutes of your time. You posted a beautiful message on Monday online for people to see, remembering Paul Gallo. What a man, what a legacy, what a radio host.
And what a friend. Richard, good morning. Absolutely. Paul and I became a state auditor. Let's see, I went into the Mississippi legislature in 1991. When Kirk Fordyce was elected governor. And I think Paul had been on the air maybe a year or so in the 90s. That seems so long ago. But we all woke up hearing this strange new voice on the radio in the 1990s, 1991. He was talking about legislation and the legislature and legislators, and we all said we better listen in case he talks about something we need to vote on. Because here's a conservative, strong morning voice that we had just never heard before. Everyone was listening to music, and there were a few national talk shows, but Paul Gallo started that phenomenon that was the Paul Gallo Show, and I remember in 1991 coming into the legislature and getting up and driving in and listening to Paul Gallo. And then, if I remember correctly, Richard helped me, but there was a young lady that was sort of a co-host in the early days with him from Hattiesburg, and that duo worked for a while. But then Paul came on with that just dynamic personality, that knowledge of exactly what he was talking about to the people of the state of Mississippi related to legislation and how the vote was going to go. And it was just, it was something new, and imagine that lasting for 30 years. Just remarkable man, remarkable times, remarkable effect, and ability to help change the process of the legislature. If I needed a bill passed in 2013, but even before that as lieutenant governors and others, but I remember that Education Reform Act in 2013, and I said, we've got to get on Paul Gallo, and we've got to tell the people what this bill is about before we can get it passed, because he can move votes. He could literally move votes in the House and Senate by his voice, by his show, by his interviews of leadership in the House and then the Senate and the governor and lieutenant governor. I can tell you there is great legislation and economic development projects that exist in the state today that would not be there had it not been for Paul Gallo and his involvement in the process through his great radio show.
What an interesting perspective. So, legislator, state auditor, lieutenant governor, and really a time frame where your political career grew as Paul Gallo's radio show was growing into what it ultimately became. And I asked Greg Harper earlier Greg Snowden earlier this morning if the things that Paul said on the radio truly did have an effect in the legislature, and he did not hesitate. He said, absolutely it did.
Richard, it was like having a joint session of the legislature whenever I went on the Paul Gallo show. I knew it because the minute I walked back in the Capitol, legislators would say, I heard you on the Paul Gallo Show, heard you on the Paul Gallo Show. Later on, when texting came in, they would say, oh, I'm listening to you, great job, oh, mention this. He was if you would, the member of the legislature, well, not member of the legislature, but the quasi-member of the legislature that could affect a vote. When you got something that was very close, a Paul Gallo show could push it over, or
it's like he was the whip.
Could kill it. He was a whip, the radio whip, Paul Gallo.
How about that? Governor, I've asked a couple of our guests if you could look into the future, not necessarily today as we're sitting here remembering Paul, but a couple of years from now, if Paul Gallo's name comes up, what's the first thing that you think you will think of?
Well, I hope they think of him being the father of talk radio in Mississippi. I know we joke about Godfather and of radio, and that's probably true as well. His Italian origin, I think, helped coin that phrase. But I think he's the father. I mean, we had nothing like that in Mississippi until Paul Gallo and SuperTalk came on. Obviously, Steve Davenport was just a genius for the idea and the concept. Talk radio had been spreading across the country, and we were listening to some national shows. But you had like Paul Harvey, news and comments. So I would always listen to the Paul Harvey show at noon before talk radio came on. That was sort of the precursor to talk radio. But Paul is the father of talk radio. You're doing a remarkable job, and I know Paul would want me to say that, sitting in and filling that chair for him, and you are, and Ricky Matthews and all the other personalities, our friend and beloved brother JT, that has passed. But Paul began it all. He was the innovator. He was the guy that said, we're going to put a flag down here at Super Talk for talk radio. It took a conservative lean, so obviously the conservative people in the state of Mississippi were listening to Paul Gallo, and he was having a direct effect on the people who said, that's the way I feel. What Paul Gallo just said about cutting taxes, that's the way I feel. What Paul Gallo said about teaching children to read, that's the way I feel. About people getting a job and getting to work and growing Mississippi and economic development coming here to this state, that's the way I feel. And when you can do something like that and connect with millions of people, as he did, obviously, during that lifetime of his show, and probably on a daily basis, hundreds of thousands of people. And when he said, this is something that's going to be great for Mississippi, and let me tell you why, and he knew the facts and circumstances and numbers to back that up, he could change the course of the state of Mississippi through his voice and through that show, and always in a positive manner. Now, maybe some of our liberal friends didn't always feel that way, but I think as you look back, they will even say the banter they may have had, any political differences they may have had melted away because they knew his heart was where it should be, and the father of talk radio in Mississippi was speaking the truth.
So well said. Governor, really appreciate your time this morning. Know Paul was a dear friend to you, in addition to being somewhat of a colleague, and the on-the-air relationship you had. Really appreciate your time and sharing some of your memories of Paul this morning.
Well, thank you all for doing this. He was a dear friend, and he will be missed. But, Richard, we know where Paul is at, and let me tell you, paradise does beat the alternative, so he is at a golden microphone on the streets of gold this morning.
Perhaps with a reunification with JT. They were so very different, but certainly similar characteristics. Governor, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. God bless you.
Former Governor of Mississippi, Phil Bryant, remembering Paul Gallo. On the Gallo Radio Show this morning, we will continue these remembrances as we honor the memory of our friend, our colleague, our brother in broadcasting, Paul Gallo. Coming up next, another former governor, Haley Barber. He'll join us when we continue. Thanks for being with us this morning on Super Talk Mississippi.
Fly away.